I was in middle school at the time, either 6th or 7th grade, so let's say like 2005-ish. I grew up in a wooded suburb in New England where the houses were about 100 feet apart and dense forest was usually in between the properties. The neighborhood families with children close to my age had a Halloween tradition called booing, where during the month of October a family would make a Halloween-themed gift basket full of candy and small toys and would leave said gift basket on the front stoop of a friend's house, ring the doorbell and run off. Ding-dong ditching with a prize. The rule was that once you got booed you had to keep the tradition going by booing a different family. Great tradition, lots of fun. I'm glad I participated in it. My family was booed, so it was our turn to do it to someone else. The night that I was going to boo my neighbor and friend, I had a buddy of mine come along just for shits and giggles. We put the gift package on my friend's stoop, rang the doorbell and book it into the woods where we hide out and watch the door. Everything goes fine. The friend I booed had no clue who it was and was excited for the gift. My friend and I who were hiding in the woods were like, damn, that was a lot of fun. I wish we could do more. We were all out of gifts, but being young, dumb teenagers, we decided to ring my other neighbor's doorbell and just run away without leaving anything. Now this neighbor's house was an older family where their children moved out, but their parents were nice enough and I'm sure wouldn't have really cared. My friend was too scared to come to the door with me, so he hid in a bush while I sneaked up to the house to ring the doorbell. I approached the door and ring the buzzer, then sprint back to the bush where my friend was hiding, only to find that he had completely bailed and now it was just me all by myself. To my surprise, my adult neighbors didn't answer the door, but instead a group of much older kids, early to mid-20s, came out, looked around, and just laughed. Rather than go back inside, they just hang out in the front yard laughing, acting all sorts of fucked up and smoking cigs. I tried to wait it out, but 30 minutes had gone by and they showed no signs of leaving. I couldn't help but notice their very strange and aggressive behavior, so now I'm beginning to get a bit nervous. Enough time passes and I eventually am so freaked out I decide to just sprint up their driveway and head straight back to my house. Two of the dudes in the group notice me and begin shouting threats at me while I ran up the driveway. One of them begins chasing me while the other gets into a car. Luckily, he had to do a 3-point turn to come after me. As I'm running up the driveway, the first guy is chasing me, but luckily I was very fast at that age and he was not able to catch me. I exit the driveway and immediately run far enough down the road to reach my property where I hid out in the forest. The second I get concealed, the car from my neighbor's house comes peeling out of the driveway and speeds down the road in my direction. They never find me, but they do many laps around the neighborhood where I can hear them trying to scare me out of hiding. I eventually trudge my way through the forest to my house where I find my friend and my parents. I tell them what happened. I didn't know this at the time, but this is where it gets creepy. Apparently, my neighbor's daughter had a serious drug addiction, hung out with a very shady crowd, and was eventually kicked out of the house. At the time of this incident, my neighbors were in Poland on vacation and told my parents to keep an eye on their house. Worried about what I told them, my parents called the police and officers arrive at my neighbor's house. The officers eventually reported to my parents that my neighbor's daughter had broken into their house, knowing her parents were away, and proceeded to throw a hardcore drug party where they absolutely trashed the place, robbed it for drug money, and eventually made it their drug hangout. One of the guys was so fucked up he even killed the family cat, and its blood was tracked throughout the house. Knowing all of this and what they were capable of, it made my encounter that more creepy. Who knows what they would have done to me if I had been caught. Back when we moved into our house, we were introduced to all of our neighbors by them coming to our house with cookies or brownies, like they do in movies. This was a nice, quiet, middle-class neighborhood, made up of mostly older white people and new families. I mention that because we were the only black family in the neighbor. No black wives, husbands, not even adopted children. We didn't find it strange though. It was just very clear that we were different. I was about 13 at the time and my brother was 15. Our backyard is half an acre and is fenced, but it's connected to two other houses' backyards. Each one is half the size of ours, but we all have separating fences. So to picture it, there's a T-shaped fence separating our backyards. The house to the left was the home of an older man named Tom. He reminded me of Willie Nelson without the cool pigtails. He liked to be outside shirtless, usually with a denim vest, no matter the weather. He was a well-built man, but visibly kind of frail. We actually found him funny, in a creepy old guy type of way. As I got older, he started to make comments. I played in the backyard with my two dogs a lot, and Tom could see me from his living room window that faced his backyard. Whenever I glanced over, I would see him in the window, just standing there, watching me. When he noticed that I saw him, he'd come out and talk to me. I tried to get away before he could come out, but sometimes I was too slow. I didn't want to make it too obvious, so I would just walk. But if I didn't make it inside, he'd yell for me to come back. I never got too close to the fence, I'd speak from a distance. He'd ask me about school, what grade I was in, tell me I was pretty, ask if I was old enough to have a boyfriend, and if I had an older sister or older friends that looked like me. I'd laugh it off. But after a few questions, he'd stop talking and just stare at me, silently. I'd always give an excuse about needing to go inside. He'd nod and stand at the fence and watch me walk back into the house. This happened almost weekly. My mom loves to decorate, so she changes the house decor every few months. Pretty annoying actually. In one of her designing sprees, she decided to get a new sliding glass door for the back porch, which required her to take the curtains down in the living room. It took forever to get them installed, but she figured there was no point in putting the curtains back up if we'd have to take them down again. Fine. Our family TV was in the living room. I didn't have a TV in my room, so I'd oftentimes watch TV late into the night in the living room with my brother. One night, my brother went to bed early, so I decided to watch TV by myself. Around midnight or so, I turned the TV off to go to bed. I got up from the couch, turned off the light, and turned around to see another light on. Not in my house, but in Tom's house. In his living room. And there he was, standing in the window, watching me. I told my parents about it later and they shrugged it off. I'm an anxious soul, so I often chalk things up to my anxiety. Soon after, my dogs started getting sick. I'd take them out to play and they'd start throwing up or having diarrhea. We knew it wasn't their food because we hadn't given them anything new. We threw away the dog treats we'd recently bought, just in case that was the problem. But it didn't stop. I noticed, though, that every time I let them out alone, they'd run straight over to Tom's fence, jumping up and down, wagging their tails. He'd slowly walk outside, reach over the fence, and feed them his treats, which was odd, because Tom didn't have a dog. I told my parents and my dad went to talk to him, telling him the dogs were getting sick. He apologized, stopped feeding them, and they got better. A few weeks later, I was coming home from high school. My brother was in a grade above me, and I was a senior, so he was in college at the time. When I got home, no one else would be home for a few more hours. I had a routine. Put my book bag upstairs, change clothes, let the dogs out of their cages on the porch, get a snack, and then let them back in. For some reason, I was unusually excited to see my dogs that day, so instead of going upstairs, I went straight to the back porch. I got to the door to open it, and I saw Tom sitting on the ground in front of my dog's cages. I froze. He didn't see me. I looked over to see if the door was locked. It wasn't. I locked it as slowly as possible so it didn't make noise. It did. He looked over and saw me standing there. I ran upstairs and called my parents. My mom's a nurse, so she didn't have her phone on, and my dad just never answered the phone. I didn't think it was serious enough to call the police, so I just hid. After a moment, I heard him knock on the door. It wasn't loud or aggressive, though. It was almost friendly. Like he just wanted to talk. I tried my dad's phone again. He answered. I was crying and telling him Tom was on the porch. He said he'd head home, but he was over an hour away. I just sat in my room, waiting for my dad. The knocking stopped. My dad got home and Tom was gone. I don't know what happened between Tom and my dad, but he stopped coming outside and talking to me. He never stopped watching though. Always standing in his living room. Sometimes I'd see him through the window and he'd wave at me. But always with the light on, just so I knew he was still there. My boyfriend and I have been together just a little over 2 years now. I moved in basically right when we got together. It was all great at first. I met all of his neighbors, and because of me he even started talking to some that he didn't before we got together. The first summer we were together, we decided to get a pool and put it in our backyard. We also started having bonfires since the weather was nice and we have a decent-sized yard. We had the pool up for about a month at this point, and we were out having a bonfire with some friends one night, having a couple drinks. Suddenly, the person who lives behind us across the alley walks up and starts talking to us. Note, we have never talked to this neighbor before. It was all normal small talk, getting to know each other's names, talking about how long we've lived there, how he'd seen us out with our dog, and how well behaved he is. Then it turned into talking about our pool. I just wish I could take a dip sometimes, you know? It's just so hot and it just looks so fun. I see you both out in it all the time, the strange neighbor says. It's probably a good time to mention, he's probably in his 50s, and my boyfriend and I are in our early 20s. My boyfriend, being the easygoing guy he is, didn't even notice that the comment was a little weird and just says, "It's no problem, man, anytime you want, just ask." I begin to look at my phone and say that it's getting late and we should all head in for the night. We say our goodbyes and figured it would all be over and ended the night normally. But that wasn't the end. My boyfriend and I are on pretty close work schedule, him working Monday through Friday 7 to 5 and me working just about any day 8 to 5. One day, I got off work a little early and came home. The way our driveway is, I can't see completely into our backyard because part of our house blocks it. I get out of my car and go into the house and into the kitchen to grab a drink. Our sink has a little window above it, which looks out over the backyard with a clear view of the pool. I look out and saw none other than our creepy neighbor, just floating in our pool. I freak out and call my boyfriend, who says just to stay in the house, he'll finish up what he's doing and come home. I do so and the creepy neighbor is gone by the time my boyfriend gets home. Now, my boyfriend is kind of a hothead when it comes to privacy and me feeling uncomfortable, so even though he was gone, my boyfriend was fuming. He understands that he gave him permission to swim in our pool, but he told him to ask first. So my boyfriend takes the ladder out of our pool and puts it in our mudroom and locks the door so no one can get it. Later on in the night, Luckily, my boyfriend was calmed down and saw creepy neighbor outside while out with the dog and talked to him about swimming in our pool without asking, and creepy neighbor apologizes, saying it was a mistake and wouldn't happen again. You'd think it's over, but it's not. We started seeing him wandering around in his backyard a lot more often than we had ever seen him do before. And in this time we had also talked to some other neighbors and learned that he was apparently a child predator. We also learned he worked with our meth head neighbors who do carpentry, who are a whole story alone. To give you some background to the next part of the story, like I mentioned earlier, our kitchen has a window that looks out over the backyard, and right next to our kitchen is our bathroom, which has a huge window that also looks out over our backyard, which happens to be right in front of our mirror and washer and dryer. Also, since my boyfriend had been a bachelor before me, he hadn't taken much time in buying curtains or anything for the house, so the windows were just completely open. Also, so you can maybe get a better picture, I may be in my early 20s, but I look like I could be about 16. We find out through neighbors who are decent friends with the meth heads that apparently creepy neighbor had been talking about watching me undress, and how he'd even tried peeking in other windows to try and see me in other places in the house. When my boyfriend hears this, he is not happy. He begins to get angrier every second, and you can see his face becoming red. He, as calmly as possible, asks the nice neighbor that had told us this as they had a spare no trespassing sign he could have, since they had just put up some in their yard. They did, along with a stake to put it in the ground with. He charges to the house and grabs a hammer, and then to the backyard where he begins to scream about creepy neighbor being a pedophile and that he's a peeping Tom. He continues to scream for about 10 more minutes, causing a couple more surrounding neighbors to come out and look, all the while I'm sitting in the house feeling completely violated. He finally came back in completely calm, hung up a blanket on the bathroom window, and calmed me down since I was really freaked out. The next day I looked his name up, and he had went to prison for sexually abusing his niece and a couple other things. Eventually he moved out and we never heard from him again. In the end, I know it was kind of stupid of me just to undress and be careless right in front of a huge window where anyone could see me, but I also thought I would be fine since I was in my own home. I'm just happy my boyfriend was there to look out for me, and I'm also thankful for my neighbors who looked out for our house, and they still do even though he's been gone.